Welcome to the ESG Network Early Career Researchers podcast. I'm Cebuan Bliss, one of the coordinators of the ECR committee. We're continuing our series of short podcasts where we're asking senior scholars what life is like for them in their early careers. Today, I'm joined by Aarti Gupta, who is Professor of Global Environmental Governance at Wageningen University in the Netherlands and is one of the new co-chairs of the Scientific Steering Committee of the ESG Network. So thanks for speaking to me today, Aarti. The first question is, what was life like for you as an ECR?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sevi, for this opportunity, and happy to speak to the early career researchers through this medium. I think life for me as an ECR, it's sort of, I would give a different answer depending on what one would understand by ECR. So if I'm talking about the phase when I was doing my PhD and a postdoc, and if that's the early career researcher phase, then I had one set of experiences. And if I speak about my first job, as an assistant professor, and that's the early career phase, that was a very different type of phase. But let me just answer that question as what I was doing when I was a PhD and a postdoc. And I think for me, life at that stage was it was exciting. There was a lot of uncertainty about the directions one could go in. So there was a certain experimentation, and that it seemed like there were a lot of possibilities, many directions one could go in. And I felt like I was in the driver's seat in that sense, being able to decide, what would I want to do, with, of course, decisions having consequences for the direction your life would take. But I felt like I could make things happen for myself. Whereas if I talk about the early career stage, when I got my first sort of academic position after finishing my PhD postdoc, then that phase felt more, it was more about conforming to the expectations of that position. And therefore, a little bit, things were more set. And therefore, the nature of the challenges, the nature of, how much you could steer what you wanted to do was just different. So but my very early career researcher life, I think for me was exciting. It could have been scary, but it was less scary and just more like a leap into the unknown. You don't know where certain directions go, and that's fine. And that's the stage of life when you can really do that, so that's the thing to really enjoy in some sense.
Yeah, and is that what you miss, that sort of unknown? What do you miss about your life as an ECR?
Yeah, I think what I miss is that sort of the possibilities that stretched in front of you, in a sense that your life could take, many different, it's also a stage of life thing, of course, and it's about being an ECR, but it's also about the opportunities that you can pursue or follow. And, there's that certain element of the unknown and the uncertain. And I think, it's a leap into certain new areas, and you're still discovering things. You're also learning what you like yourself, what's meaningful, what you might have an idea that this could be an interesting, avenue to explore, whether that's topic or whether that's, I don't know, geographical context. And then you try it out for a bit and you realize, well, maybe is that for me or isn't it for me? And I think once you're more settled, those things are also more settled. So now, once you have your the job that you're doing, you have a permanent position perhaps in academia, then certain things are sorted. And there's, of course, a lot to be said for that. There's certainly huge benefits of that. But that element of, experimentation, the unknown, that part is somewhat gone. Yeah. So that's, I guess, what I miss to some extent. But I also, of course, appreciate the other side, all the benefits that come from having more certainty.
And what was the biggest challenge you faced during this period?
Well, I think if I'm talking about that, so I have this distinction, right, between my PhD postdoc early career phase and my first assistant professor sort of tenure track phase. So I think the challenges I faced in that first phase, there were many, like I said, everything was undecided. So I didn't see that actually as a challenge. I found that, I mean, it was just the nature of things, and I felt like it allowed me to really make the kinds of things that I wanted to have happen, make them happen for me. So I didn't really, and it's, of course, I could give lots of examples, but I don't think we have I mean, I could explain what I mean by making certain things happen, the trajectory, the career trajectory that you decide to take, and whether it's the topic you focus on or where you go and what whether you stay in the academic context or you explore other things and then come back to academia because you realize that that's what is, so there was lots of that sort of experimentation, also moving around between places. I tried to figure out whether I wanted a more disciplinary type of academic trajectory, a more interdisciplinary one. And we're talking about many, some decades ago. So interdisciplinarity, environmental issues, all of this was not so much, so taken for granted at the time that I was making those decisions as it is today. So that was all new and exciting and challenging. Also about the label that one puts on oneself, what are you? What sort of, background you have to define yourself? How do you define yourself? And what are the risks and benefits of defining yourself, in a disciplinary way or an interdisciplinary way? What could be the consequences for your... So there are many different things that one has to take into account at that stage, and that these could be seen as challenges as well. But I sort of found that a very nice time in my life when I could figure these things out for myself and experiment and maybe change direction. So, you explore something, but it may turn out not to be what you thought it was. And that's okay. So that's kind of the message I would give early career researchers as well, that not to feel like if you're going down one path that, it's you've made a decision for life, you're locked into it. And then, and that can seem so scary that it's almost paralyzing to make a choice, because you feel like this is it then. But it doesn't have to be at that stage. You're young and you can change directions, you can explore. And the only way to really know what you actually enjoy and what's the right fit for you is to try it out for a bit. And, you can't really sit in a chair and think, okay, pros and cons of this or that. So I find that, yeah, that was... So in a way, it was a challenge to also decide something and then stick to your guns about why you think that's a good decision, even if it's not the mainstream decision. So for example, pursuing environmental topics or interdisciplinarity at the stage that I was doing went against the mainstream in the place where I was at the time. So it was really going, saying that, no, I'd rather do something different, which was not considered very wise, perhaps, according to my mentors, or, I mean, if I had any at the time. So
it sounds like good advice not to fear a path dependency.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, at that early stage in your life, nothing is written in stone. You can always change directions.
Yeah.
And the best way to figure out what you actually are interested in is to explore. Yeah.
And what makes your work meaningful to you?
I think, well, honestly, it took me a while. I would think about that a lot. I think as many people do. So, I think that's something that it also, I mean, one can give a lot of, I guess, trite answers to that, or like pat answers to that. But I think it's really something that one has to think about and come to a realization about. So I think for me, I've sort of made my peace with the fact that I think the path I've chosen is meaningful way to do the things that I feel are important. I think as an academic, I engage with some of the most pressing challenges facing us today, some of the most pressing societal challenges. And I feel like the academic path to or the academic sort of vehicle to address those is, there are many different ways to engage with the pressing societal challenges. And I think this is one important way. And I like the direction that academia has gone in, where it's much more about actively engaging. I'm exploring now what it means to be sort of a scholar activist. That's also very, it can be a controversial, sort of confronting term for many people. Also, there's a debate within academia, to what extent should, academics also go out there and try to actively, influence. And this is going beyond the normal sort of science for impact or socially relevant research, where you hope that, something you put out has some sort of consequence, is taken up, but just to actively engage yourself as a scholar. I think that's something that makes my work meaningful. It's taking on some of the most controversial issues and actually making your normative position on those known, and not feeling like, because that my credibility as an academic will be lessened if I voice my normative stance on something, because we all have normative stances, and everybody does, obviously. So I think making those known does not take away from the credibility of your academic work. And I think that combination makes it meaningful for me.
Yeah, having the courage to take a normative stance on something, which sometimes as early career researchers, maybe we don't feel qualified to do.
Well, it's all, yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think that's also something that, I think young people are very, very brave and courageous and idealistic, and make their normative stances known. So that's also, but of course there are practical considerations and, career considerations. So that's not to suggest that, as a more senior person, you're more in a safer space perhaps to do that, especially if they're controversial issues. So there are many practical considerations. So I wouldn't, I'm just saying that that's what makes it meaningful for me today. But I think even from an earlier career perspective, to know that one is engaging with, very pressing, sort of the main questions of our time, it makes it meaningful. And, you can choose the moment when you want to come out and, be more or less present in a sort of vocal, controversial space. So that's totally fine. But yeah, I think in general, the academic profession is certainly conducive to making a meaningful, impact, is what I've come to believe after many years of being in academia. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. And finally, what was the most helpful piece of advice you were given as an ECR?
That I would give.
That you were given, or you would give, whichever you prefer.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, it's very interesting, because if I look back at that confusing, sort of uncertain but experimental time when I was trying to decide things as a very early career researcher, I don't think I had much advice, in the sense, it was different context as well. I think one thing that my advisors at my bachelor's level, when I was trying to decide where to do my PhD and in what subject, was they said, go to the highest profile name that you get admission to, for example. I actually didn't take that advice at the time, because I thought, no, I should rather, I shouldn't pursue standard metrics of, prestige, etc., but rather do what seems most meaningful wherever that is. But I would, so that's sort of a side issue. I don't know if that's a very context specific experience. But I think my general advice, it's very cliched, but it's the cliche that I've sort of lived, has worked for me, which is really, I think, in the biggest decisions, you have to follow your gut instinct. You can kind of analyze the smaller decisions, but the biggest ones, you have to follow your gut and you have to follow your heart. And that's what eventually works out, and not be afraid to take a leap into the dark and a leap into the unknown. I mean, that has worked out for me. You know, if you feel like, yeah, there's something telling you this is the right thing, this is what I really want to do, go all for it and explore it. And you can always change directions later. You can always, you know, realize that maybe some aspect of it isn't quite what you thought it would be, but it's worth giving it a try first. So try out the thing that you're most convinced about is what I would say. And don't be afraid of, I mean, there are lots of practical considerations. Of course, not everyone has the option to, you know, experiment with risky things, but in general, where that possibility exists, I would say, go for it. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Follow your gut. Those are wise words to finish on. Thank you very much for your time, Aarti.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And yeah, I wish all early career researchers to find sort of the meaningful path, to find their own path, and hopefully it's not too intense and stressful along the way.
Thank you. Bye.